Welcome to Texas First. I'm MJ Dawson. In Norway, they've got a word for something completely wild, untamed, and gloriously out of control. Helt Texas. It's their slang for pure, unfiltered chaos. If that doesn't scream Texas spirit, nothing does. Well, what if the pandemic wasn't Helt Texas at all, but the exact opposite? A suffocating, rule-enforced machine designed to crush disobedience. Everything you were told, a calculated lie designed to strip away your freedoms, destroy livelihoods, and funnel trillions to the elite, while silencing anyone who dared question it. That's not speculation. That's what happened. Lockdowns crushed small businesses and families. Mandates coerced millions into experimental shots. Dissent was crushed with labels: racist, dangerous, killer. Meanwhile, an estimated $40 trillion in global wealth was quietly transferred from everyday people to big pharma, tech overlords, Wall Street, and government insiders who cashed in on the chaos. Today, we tear down the lies and set the record straight. My guest today is Dr. Peter McCullough, the most courageous and credentialed voice to challenge the COVID narrative head-on, and the kind of bold, principled Texan we're proud to call one of our own. A board-certified internist and cardiologist who put down roots here, president of the McCullough Foundation, chief scientific officer at the Wellness Company, and co-author of bestsellers like The Courage to Face COVID-19 and Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. When silence or compliance was the easy path, Dr. McCullough risked everything: career, reputation, certifications, to speak the data, fight for patients, and defend the freedoms Texans hold dear. Dr. McCullough stood for truth when the world demanded silence. Today, we honor that Helt Texas spirit, and we're about to hear it straight from one of our best. It was doing more harm than good.
Well, you know, vaccination is always a bad idea in the setting of a pandemic. Always. In fact, a principle of virology and immunology and vaccinology is don't vaccinate into a widely prevalent pandemic. When we do this, some individuals will be vaccinated, some won't. The virus, as it exists, is never a single strain, but it's actually a population of different strains, because viruses rapidly replicate. They make little mistakes and they form little unique strains. So at any given time, if somebody had the infection, there was probably 800 or so unique different virions in the population of viruses they had. In the setting of a vaccine, only thing that's going to happen is the virus will outsmart the vaccine every time and become resistant.
I've been looking forward to doing this for quite a while. You, I believe, were the bravest voice to speak out in COVID. You had everything to lose, very little to gain. And I just can't thank you enough for the honesty. And I also want to say too, is I've been interviewing people for 30 years. I've interviewed thousands of people. Anytime I reach out to high profile people, they always want to know what the questions are. They want to know our background. They want to know what the show is, because they don't want to get trapped. They don't want to get ambushed. You didn't ask me any of that stuff. And to me, that was just such a great way of showing that you have nothing to hide. You're willing to talk to anyone about this for anyone. And like Dr. Fauci would never come on this show, you know, because he's not necessarily in friendly territory. He doesn't know what questions he's going to be asked. But to me, I felt like that just speaks volumes to the man you are.
Well, thank you. But can I disagree with your opening statement?
Please.
Podcasts are good for disagreement. This is where I disagree. You said I had little to gain. Well, here we were in 2000. A virus was spreading across the world. No one really knew what was going on early. Now we learned, it came out of a Chinese biosecurity lab. It did cause severe syndrome in some very frail elderly people. And sadly, it did take some lives. And the idea as a doctor to actually be able to help in the setting of a global crisis, to actually make a contribution, to show people a fundamental framework by which they can treat themselves at home and then avoid too bad outcomes, hospitalization and death. That was the opportunity of a lifetime. That was an academic opportunity of a lifetime. And I was stunned that major medical centers were not going for that opportunity. It really was, you think Harvard would want to have their name all over the McCullough Protocol, the very first comprehensive multi-drug treatment protocol that's evidence-backed and published in a very high level peer reviewed journal, you think Harvard would want their name all over it, or Mayo Clinic, or any other major organization. I was stunned with the opportunity, the academic opportunity, and no one was going for it. So in many ways, I did have a lot to go for because I was helping people all over the world.
Most definitely. And there's a reason why this topic is just so near and dear to my heart. I lost a very close family member to COVID.
Oh, boy.
Oh, they didn't die. I lost them to the propaganda. They're double vaxxed, triple masked. And this guy, he and I were best friends for all these years. And that we barely talking about. We've actually started talking again just recently, but for a good 5 years, we just stopped talking because of all the propaganda that got thrown on it. I remember him calling me at one point, shaming me for not getting the vax because this thing was going to spread. It was going to mutate and start killing children. And basically, I'm a child killer if I don't get the vax. If I don't get this experimental vaccine that doesn't seems, from what I was seeing, was doing more harm than good.
Well, vaccination is always a bad idea in the setting of a pandemic. Always. In fact, a principle of virology and immunology and vaccinology is don't vaccinate into a widely prevalent pandemic. When we do this, some individuals will be vaccinated, some won't. The virus, as it exists, is never a single strain, but it's actually a population of different strains because viruses rapidly replicate. They make little mistakes and they form little unique strains. So at any given time, if somebody had the infection, there was probably 800 or so unique different virions in the population of viruses they had. In the setting of a vaccine, that's the only thing that's going to happen is the virus will outsmart the vaccine every time and become resistant. So it was a colossal mistake to say the premier approach to handle this will be vaccination. It was flawed from the beginning. And I published an op-ed in the Hill, and that's widely read by the House, the Senate, the White House, and myself. I was at Baylor at the time. Scott Ellis was at Stanford. We were the two doctors, eminent doctors, requested by the Hill editorial staff to write op-eds each month. And by the time we got to August of 2020, now this is 4 months before the vaccines come out, I published an op-ed, and the title of it was The Great Gamble of the COVID-19 Vaccine Development Program. Believe it or not, you are talking to the only public figure in the world who questioned the vaccines in writing big time before they came out.
Remember?
Even the other, quote, great skeptics of the program or critics of the program now, they didn't say a word publicly in 2020. Yeah. So my observation was, even the greatest skeptics out there, they were seduced. They were seduced by the coming of a savior, and the savior being a vaccine.
So the vaccine, I remember watching an interview with RFK where he was saying that the vaccine existed before COVID, that it was military. Can you expand on that?
Probably the best reference is called COVID-19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey by Dr. Peter Breggin, and I was honored to write the introduction for that. And in that book, Breggin starts out, it's probably around 2002 to 2004, where there was a series of what's called pandemic planning events. And there are 36 of them total. Now, there are meetings, various maneuvers within government agencies worldwide. 24 of them produced written documents, and 6 of them you can just watch on video. So for sure, the COVID-19 pandemic was planned ahead of time. And for sure, the vaccines, as a response to the pandemic, were pre-prepared. Now, in our book, if you can hold it up,
with the courage
to face COVID-19, and then the second one is vaccines, mythology, ideology, and reality. We point out that, and it's still on the website today, if people want to do their research, this is so much fun. You can go to DARPA, which is a biomedical research unit of the military. It's U.S. government website. The thing is, everything's in the open. And in 2012, DARPA announces a program, a development program, and it's called the ADEPT P3 program. And in that, the aspiration of that program is they will end pandemics in 60 days with messenger RNA vaccines. Messenger RNA vaccines. So it's and broadly announced to the world in 2012 that the U.S. is going to do this.
8 years earlier.
It's stunning. And in Bregan's book, he starts to outline the cadence of this. And we do it in our book, Vaccines, as well. There's the BioShield Act in 2003, kind of getting ready for this biological threat development, countermeasure development that we get into. And then the 2004 PrEP Act, just, HHS and Congress write it. They said, there will be a pandemic, for sure.
Yeah.
And there'll be a pandemic, and it's going to be like a war. And when a pandemic occurs, the government's going to step into action and create countermeasures or things to protect the population. And all of those will be immune from liability. That's the PrEP Act.
Yeah, that's terrifying. That's terrifying. And I also find it hysterical that we found out within the last week that, Bill Gates, the one telling us all how to be healthy, was apparently slipping his wife penicillin because he caught an STD from a Russian hooker. Like, these are the people that are giving this health advice. And I remember Peter Hotez going on Rogan, and, in the obvious, he was this overweight man whose teeth looked like they're falling out, who's trying to tell us how to be healthy. Like, it was just absolutely absurd to me that the people that we're getting advice from are just some of the worst human beings on the planet. Which brings me to Dr. Fauci. Is, this isn't his first rodeo. I mean, we go back to the AIDS epidemic. I don't know how much you know about the AIDS epidemic, and if you do, I would really love to hear everything you know about Fauci's role in the AIDS epidemic, because from my understanding is he basically caused it to be a lot worse than it was. The cure was killing way more people than the disease.
I take a different view on this, and I know a lot of that is read from Robert F. Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci. I'm the most mentioned doctor in the book besides.
I've read it.
And I did look over it and try to help Kennedy, but it was a rushed work. But no, I was a medical resident. I was in practice during the AIDS outbreak. Fauci did not have command or control over AIDS at all. We made our own decisions. We used zidovudine originally. Then we got into a combination of drugs, and we learned, the name of the illness changed. So Fauci was head of the National Immunology, Allergy, Infectious Disease branch, but he wasn't calling the shots on AIDS. The major academic medical centers, I was at University of Washington at the time. We were a leader. There were other leaders out there. But what we saw with Anthony Fauci later on was the emergence. When he became the senior White House coronavirus advisor, he took on a whole new countenance. And one of the interviews, he literally says the hubris here is that he represents science. So if you disagree with him, you're anti-science. Peter Hotez also says that. If you disagree with him, you're anti-science. Well, let me tell you, I'm a scientist. I'm more published than Peter Hotez is. Yes. Okay, I have more original, important contributions than Fauci does. So I am telling you, as the senior doctor in the group, that science is a process. It's a process. Nobody is anti-science or pro-science. It's a process we use in hypothesis testing. Now, when you dig deeper, and in our book Vaccines, we use in the title, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. What we've learned is that an ideology has formed around vaccines, that vaccines are uniformly good. Those who promote vaccines are virtuous. Those who doubt or skeptical about vaccines are vaccine hesitant. World Health Organization, Peter Hotez, Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci, they would all say that vaccine hesitancy is a threat to global health. So there's a presupposition that vaccines are always good, and acceptance of is good, and skepticism is bad. So it's already set up. Can you imagine if we already set that up for the next drug to be approved? It's going to be good, and if you're skeptical, you're spreading, incorrect information. So let's just examine a few more things. So Bill Gates who really is in antitrust litigation over Netscape and Microsoft. Essentially, he's shown to be somebody who's willing to violate business law big time. So he gets out of that business and he forms the Gates Foundation and becomes a philanthrocapitalist. And he's on tape saying, "Listen, the biggest return I can make on my money is with vaccines." And so he becomes a wild enthusiast for vaccines, states aspirations of global vaccination, forms the Gates Foundation with the World Economic Forum. They form CEPI in 2017, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, which states there will be a series of global pandemics, and each time, vaccines will be the solution. And I'll never forget, and it's in my first book, Courage to Face COVID-19, it is very early April of 2020. And somehow Bill Gates is being interviewed on TV. Why would he be interviewed? He's not a doctor. He doesn't have any medical responsibility for anything.
He's a college dropout.
But
I have nothing against college dropouts. I'm a college dropout myself, but
well, his interview,
nobody wants me running the show.
He states, he goes, this COVID-19 pandemic will not end until every person on the planet takes the vaccine. Well, what's the backdrop for that? Gates in 2017 with Bloomberg School of Public Health holds a seminar. It's called the SPARS pandemic. And they publish a meeting proceedings. They publish two peer-reviewed papers. In 2017, Gates says there will be a COVID-19 pandemic. There will be a coronavirus pandemic. He puts it in writing. He says there'll be great confusion about treatment, and we're going to basically organize social media, major media, the White House, and we're going to railroad vaccines on the country. He says that in 2017, and then in 2019, it's wide open. 2019, November 2019, Gates Foundation again, Bloomberg School of Public Health, Johns Hopkins, they hold Event 201. And there, we have who's going to be our next Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. All the other players are there. And they said, oh, for sure, it's a coronavirus pandemic, for sure. In fact, they even had a little work group, Avril Haines' work group with George Gao, is the Chinese CDC director, who flew over for it, said that they were going to work to cover up the laboratory origins of COVID-19. It's right there. It's right there in Event 201. So you can't make this up. Hotez, the third person you mentioned, now he is a pediatrician. He's an MD, PhD at Baylor in Houston. And, over the course of the pandemic, he's been hailed as a hero. He's received tens of millions of dollars of monetary prizes for his heroism. Now, when he was going on CNN, he was largely advising people to wait in lockdown and wait for a vaccine. He never mentioned another approach. Now, I was a frequent contributor and still am for Fox and other stations. I was coming on Fox and they'd present Hotez or Fauci, and I'd say, there's a different approach. These vaccines look like they're not going to work, and they clearly, once they rolled out, they weren't working. People need early treatment. They need strategies to reduce the intensity and severity of the infection and get through it. In the end, 90% of us all got vaccine or all got the illness. 90% of us got SARS-CoV-2, and that's a great application, by the way, for AI. So I asked AI, what percent of the world's population got SARS-CoV-2? And they searched every database, the county databases, you name it, and the answer is about 90%, good estimate. Now, 81% of Americans took one or more shots. Now, 19% didn't. I didn't take it. Did you take it?
I did not.
Okay, so you and I are in the 19%, so we don't have to.
I call us pure bloods.
Yeah, so we didn't take it. Now, it turns out only 70% took 2 shots. Listen, people after the first shot realized this was toxic. We had a big CDC self-reported vSafe, self-reported safety network on the cell phone. And people, there was 10 million people who signed up to basically be research subjects for the CDC. After the first shot, the rate of people getting sick and having to go to the ER, clinic, or be hospitalized was 7.7%. So people knew these shots early on were non-toxic. But Hotez goes on, and he's an interesting case study. And you mentioned he goes on Joe Rogan. He doesn't present himself well. He's just disheveled. He's in some type of cluttered background in his basement half the time. But sadly, he has a daughter, Rachel, and she undoubtedly is, a heavily vaccinated child because he's a vaccine developer, right? So for him, all vaccines are good. The more vaccines, the better. And she develops autism.
Yeah, I knew about this.
So he publishes a book, and this is classic psychological, this is a coping mechanism, where the title of his book is "The MMR Vaccine Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism." Now, when someone does that, it means they actually truly believe
absolutely.
just the opposite, right? So that's psychological projection.
Yep.
And the fact that he would do that, that shows the oblivion that people are walking around with. And so this keeps going and going. Fauci gets so deep into this, and it's determined that he is funding the main developers, which are Dr. Ralph Barrick at UNC Chapel Hill, Peter Daszak at the EcoHealth Alliance, and Dr. Xingling Li, the Bat Lady at Wuhan, that they're part of the creation of SARS-CoV-2. They clearly were involved in the cover-up. All the emails show this. And then Fauci greatly misleads pandemic response. He suppresses early treatment, which costs lives, and then he promoted the vaccines, which costs lives in terms of side effects. So Fauci, before the end of Biden's term, and this is how it works, he went to Biden and requested clemency. He requested a pardon and gets a preemptive 10-year pardon going all the way back to 2014. For a doctor, this is very notable. He must have known that he committed grievous crimes, very huge crimes. And people have asked me, well, what are the crimes Fauci committed? With his co-conspirators, I would allege that he committed fraud. It was fraudulent concealment of the origins of SARS-CoV-2. And then he also committed mass negligent homicide by suppressing all forms of early treatment, including the McCullough protocol, which is the most widely used protocol in the world, and promoting the unsafe vaccines.
I mean, basically, the only reason you're doing that is to develop a bioweapon. Am I correct on that?
Gain-of-function research, the main purpose of it is largely to develop biological threats, in my opinion. Now, the claimed use of it would be, well, nature could throw us a curveball. Nature, a very, very aggressive organism could arise of nature. And if we do research on this, we can get ahead of nature. And I think that's a flawed platform because it's outside of a Spanish flu, it's the only situation. And the Spanish flu had so many unique features to it. I'm not sure the Spanish flu was completely natural.
That's my understanding too.
Well, because it was post-World War I. Many young people were living in army barracks. They were right on top of each other. People weren't in their natural agrarian types of economies at the time and their roles in those economies. We were in this post-World War II. There was a nutritional strain on the population. And remember, people don't die of influenza. They die of a secondary staphylococcal pneumonia. We cover that in my book on vaccines, where the depictions of the young men dying of Spanish flu is they become hypoxic. So they were blue, and then there would be copious pus flowing out of the mouth. And that was actually staphylococcal. That's not viral. So as we sit here today, if you ask me, Dr. McCullough, could there be another Spanish flu coming out of nature? No. Even if something did come, we're well equipped to handle it. What all the experts believe, MJ, is that the next pandemic will come again from a biolab.
They want to experiment with these diseases in order to protect us from these diseases, but they're giving us these diseases.
Well, there's a term.
So
there's a term. It's called pathogens of pandemic potential that are dual purpose. There's actually legislation written on this. So they're pathogens, they're bugs, so that'd be a virus, a bacteria, a fungi, that are capable of getting the whole world sick, but they serve two purposes: to get the world sick and then to be able to create a countermeasure, largely a vaccine or a therapeutic. And so that's the the proposal for this research, which is richly funded. And by the way, it's richly funded by non-governmental agencies, Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Wellcome Trust, the Chinese Communist Party. So China actually had such a lab in Ridgely, California. They just had found one in Las Vegas, for instance. So, pulling government funding for gain-of-function research, that's going to do nothing.
Yeah.
And there are biolabs that McCullough Foundation, Nick Kulsher recently published in a Substack, a compilation. There's 3,600 of these lethal biolabs in the world, about a dozen in the United States. The closest one to us is in Galveston, Texas. That's about 6 hours away.
Yeah.
You get a big viral cloud coming out of Galveston, Texas. Watch out.
Wow. So I guess we didn't learn a lesson, and so no biolabs have been shut down. I don't buy the idea that this was just ignorance, that, hey, we're trying to get ahead of the vaccine. Oops. To me, it seems pretty obvious that we're developing a bioweapon, but what I don't understand is, why would we be developing a bioweapon in the country that is our chief adversary right now, in China? Because presumably, if we're ever going to use a bioweapon, that's who we'd be using it against. Am I missing something here?
I think it's much more of strategy. So think about this. Think about the analogy of developing a novel nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm.
If you developed a novel nuclear weapon and you developed a nuclear defense system and you held both products, whoever you were, if you're a private company, if you're a non-governmental organization, or if you're a government, you hold power. So you hold the pathogen and you hold the vaccine. That was the aspiration of Peter Daszak, who is now, he no longer leads the EcoHealth Alliance. And Daszak, under oath in Congress, testified he's got dozens more of these in the Wuhan lab. He doesn't know how many are left there. So the goal was actually to have negotiating power. So can you imagine you're in confidential negotiations with China or Russia or Ukraine, and the list goes on, and says, we want a little more favorable tariff situation, but we want to let you know that, we don't need a nuclear weapon. We don't need guns or ammo. We have something far more powerful that we can use. Just want to let you know that, Mr. President. Can you imagine the types of negotiations? All you need to have is COVID-20 locked and loaded. Let's say it's a little bit more lethal and a little bit more infectious. And can you imagine a businessman, an agent of whatever adversarial country, just spilling a bottle on a New York subway? We're toast.
Yeah.
So the point is, it's about power. So all this, the race of biolabs is about power. There's a place where there's a lot of biolabs? Ukraine.
I did know that, yes. And that was a conspiracy theory a couple of years ago, and you were a pro-Putin puppet if you said that out loud. So that's been confirmed. And how much do you believe that the Ukraine biolabs are playing into the Russian war right now?
I don't know. On world events right now, because we just don't have, I think, trustable reporting. Yes. For me to make any commentary on the Russian-Ukraine war, I'd have to go there.
No, totally understand.
You know what I mean? I really would have to go there, because the numbers that are reported in terms of casualties, we don't have the visual footage to support it. And any type of reporting, whether it comes from the border crisis or the Mideast or in Iran, you see numbers now that just begin to just run up. The most recent one is in Iran. Well, is it 2,000 protesters killed? Is it 20,000? Is it 200,000? Is it 2 million? I mean, there's no end to these numbers. And without any press, without any confirmation. So what I've always said is, listen, I'm happy to comment on geopolitics, but personally, if I was a leader of any nation, I would go to the front line.
Yeah.
Personally, I would go. This is very important. Our leaders have not had that courage. I personally would go. I mean it. I would go, and I would see with my own eyes. And then I'd come back and say, listen, this is the situation.
Now, let's talk lockdowns. I remember reading a study a few years back that said that the lockdowns, if you're to look at years of life cost versus saved versus actual lives. So for instance, if the lockdowns save an 81-year-old and buys him 3 years of life, but a 20-year-old commits suicide and loses 60 years of life. When you actually look at it from that factor, it ends up being about, for every year of life you saved, you lost about 100 years.
Oh my Lord. I mean, those are theoretical. Remember, quarantine comes from Quantico, and I believe it stands for 45 days. But, that was born in reasonableness, like yellow fever. So if a boat had a bunch of men with yellow fever, a ship comes into New Orleans, they'd say, listen, you got to wait out there 45 days, and this yellow fever's got to make its run, and then you can come to port. So quarantine is reasonable, and it actually largely helped bring smallpox under control and even measles outbreaks under control. But for the sick, so lockdowns or quarantine only apply to the sick, not to healthy. See, people, it got inverted that everybody has to shelter in place. Remember Dallas County, our county executive, Clay Jenkins, in March of 2020, we chronicle it in my book, Courage to Face COVID-19, he puts out a command that says we must shelter in place.
I remember.
As if bombs are going off outside, what have you. And we have an opening scene in our book. You think this is really entertaining. Remember, some states were a lot worse than Texas, one of them California. So there's this very frustrated guy. He kind of looks like you. He's in great shape. And he's frustrated with these lockdowns and masks. So he gets on his paddleboard with his golden retriever, and he just paddles way out into San Francisco Bay, like far away from everybody. And he finally takes down his mask to get just a little bit of fresh air. And immediately the Coast Guard speeds out and arrests this guy for violating. So this shows you that through the pandemic, people lost their minds. Quarantine is fine. Quarantine is fine. Listen, I was at a major medical center here in Dallas. If someone got sick with COVID, and I supervised a lot of people there, so listen, go home. At first, we didn't know if it was 2 weeks or 10 days or 5 days, but go home until you don't have a fever anymore, would have your symptoms are controllable, and come back. We would give the same advice if it was influenza or anything else. So quarantine is fine, but locking down healthy people, we've never seen that. And you're right, it caused harm. I think the biggest harm is, in Dallas, and I bet in Collin County it was the same. They shut down public schools for a year.
Yeah.
Isn't that as stunning? And the parochial schools didn't shut down. And there were no major outbreaks among teachers. There was no bona fide serious cases from student to teacher. All of it was unnecessary. Can you imagine losing a year of education? And some of the kids in Dallas are underprivileged, South Dallas, and they need that education. And to try to get it on Zoom, I don't buy it.
Yeah. I would at the time. I remember just driving to work because I was one of the few that was still allowed to go to work. Okay. And we had about maybe I would go on 635 every day to work, and we have maybe 20% of the traffic, and there would be about 5 wrecks on the way there because in the 1 week that people stopped driving, everyone forgot how to drive. And it was absolutely wild how much that took over. I saw something with you recently where you're talking about the adjusted numbers of how many people died, because we're told 10 million, tens of millions. I'm guessing we're in the trillions now. How many Americans actually died from COVID?
Yeah, I've testified in Congress on this, and there are data to point to. And put this in Substack. Again, wonderful activity for artificial intelligence. Because artificial intelligence can go to every database, including coroner's databases where deaths were examined and adjudicated. Our U.S. policy for infectious diseases, by the way, this is HHS and the CDC, is if you test positive for an infectious disease and then you die at any time later on, you actually died attributed to the infectious disease. It's just
even if you got it 6 months earlier.
Even if 6 months earlier or the death is, and that's true for influenza. This has been going on for a long time. So if you test positive for influenza and later on that year you die of a hip fracture, is considered an influenza death. This has been going on forever. So it inflates infectious disease deaths. Okay. The CDC does that because their view is if we are conservative and make it look like a more severe public health problem, people will take more vaccines. So it's set up that way. So influenza is set up that way. Bird flu is reported that way. So it goes into COVID. So test positive at any time and death at any time, that's a COVID death. And because I was wondering what was going on early on, because I did have a patient of mine who died in 2020. And it took me about 6 weeks to adjudicate the case, complete the death certificate, finalize it with the state. 6 weeks. Well, I turn on the news every night, and you see that little counter in the upper right-hand corner, number of COVID deaths, click, click, click. I said, wait a minute, it takes 6 weeks to ascertain a death. How are they doing it minute by minute? They were just doing test positive at any time and then death at any time. So people didn't necessarily die of COVID. So the official numbers right now are about 1.2 million Americans test positive any time, died at any time. Now, this is what we know about the deaths. About 40% of the deaths occurred to people who were beyond their actuarial lifespan. So an actuarial lifespan for a man at that time was like 79, a woman 80 or 81. So they were advanced age people who were at the end of life, 40%. Huge fraction in nursing homes. And then another large fraction of people really sick. So patients on dialysis, advanced cancer, obesity, diabetes. When we look at the National Center for Health Statistics data, and they stopped keeping track of this in 2023, if this ever tells you anything. But as of 2023, of the COVID deaths that the government was counting, half had no pneumonia on the chart, no mention of pneumonia on the chart at all. So I can tell you that 1.2 million easily cut it in half to 600,000. Now, when you do artificial intelligence or look at the peer-reviewed literature, and I've published the largest autopsy study kind of in the pandemic era, we would come down to, if we carefully adjudicated the cases, we would come down to conservatively 10% of that 1.2 million truly died of COVID. 10%.
120,000.
Right. There's an Italian study saying 3%. But I would go with this. If you're asking me if I'm under oath on the MJ Dawson, a Senate testimony, I would say under oath, 120,000 Americans died of COVID. Now, my estimates are if they would have received early treatment, McCullough protocol, starting with fresh air and nasal sprays and gargles and the oral drugs and IV drugs and everything we do, home oxygen, we could have saved 85% of them. So truly, the number of people who died of COVID that we just couldn't save if we had done everything is probably about 35,000. Now, a flu season could be 50 to 75,000. Yeah. So the mortality was grossly overstated. And I think even to this day, I've testified 5 times in the Senate, they'll say, Dr. McCullough, COVID was a bad illness. I've been in court cases where the doctor opposing me would say, listen, I took care of these people. They were dying right in front of me. And I asked the question, did you ever treat them at home? Of course, when people get sick enough in the hospital, they look really sick. What about treating them at home? There's 2 bad outcomes, hospitalization and death. If you got the illness and you weren't hospitalized, you didn't die, you're through it. Isn't it stunning? We went through the first Trump administration. So we had Trump, we had the entire HHS administration. Not one official in Washington could state the problem. Not one. The problem was there's a virus, people are getting sick, and there's 2 bad outcomes, hospitalization and death. The only way to stop both outcomes is to do something before the hospitalization. No one could articulate that. There was no chief medical officer at any medical school in the United States who could articulate the problem and the goal of a solution. I did. That was the McCullough protocol. That's the most widely used. I published it in August of 2020 in the American Journal of Medicine. It was widely adopted by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. We published the best data we could actually here from Collin County that it was effective in using multiple drugs in combination. It was flexible. We adapted it over time as more data came in. But you're talking to the only public figure in the world who could articulate the problem and the goal of a solution. I did. That was the McCullough protocol. That's the most widely used. I published it in August of 2020 in the American Journal of Medicine. It was widely adopted by the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. We published the best data we could actually here from Collin County that it was effective in using multiple drugs in combination. It was flexible. We adapted it over time as more data came in. But you're talking to the only public figure in the world who could articulate the problem and a solution. The solution had to be before the hospitalization. And here we had Scott Atlas advising the president. Scott, I know. I read his book. Not one time did Scott say he ever discussed treatment with Trump. Now in Washington, we have Marty Makary, who's heading the FDA, who's my group at Fox. Never once did he mention that we should treat COVID before the hospitalization. Jay Bhattacharya, leading NIH and CDC right now. Not once did he ever mention it. We have Robert F. Kennedy now in charge of HHS. Since he's been in office, there's still like COVID cases. Not once has he ever mentioned early treatment. Yeah. So we had Biden, he never mentioned it. Fauci never mentioned it. Now we have Trump again. No mention. This is a stunning observation. Really? None of our leaders can recognize early treatment as a strategy. You never saw a billboard here in Dallas saying, listen, get an early treatment protocol. This was such a gap that in 2022, I worked with other business leaders and we formed the Wellness Company. Wellness Company is now the brightest, most rapidly growing healthcare company emerging from the pandemic. And the very first thing we did is we took the McCullough protocol, we made it into a treatment kit. And we said, you know what? Never again are we going to get burned. And I've had a meeting with HHS and Kennedy, and we talked about pandemic response. I said, listen, if you guys aren't going to do anything, we are.
Yeah.
And the next pandemic, you're not going to be dialing up the government and say, what do I do? People are going to come to the Wellness Company. We have our own pharmacies. We have our manufacturing. We can spool up easily. We can scale up to handle a pandemic. The Wellness Company is pandemic response, not the government.
I completely agree with that. Anytime you let the government in charge of anything, it's always worse.
Well, we learned it during COVID.
So let's talk about the McCullough protocol. So if we were to do it all over again as 2020, this thing hits, in knowing everything you even know now, what would you do? How would you have handled this in a way that would have absolutely minimized deaths without having to lock people down, without having to force people into some kind of experimental, jab and so forth?
But it would start with what I did as a doctor. Think about this. I have patients with heart failure, kidney failure. They're sick. They're elderly. They got lots of problems. They called me and they said, Dr. McCullough, I've got a fever. I'm sick with COVID. I got a test. And I went to urgent care of the ER and they told me there's no treatment. I called my doctor and they said, sorry, the government says, wait till you're sick enough to come in the hospital. I'm scared. I don't want to go in the hospital. What reasonable doctor would turn them down? Isn't it stunning that all the faculties of all the big medical centers turn their patients down? All the community doctors turn their patients down. They said, listen, sorry. I said, no way. I said, we can do something. We could do something. So we started with the basics. Open the windows. It was a wonderful spring here in Texas. Get fresh air. Reduce the viral burden in the house. The worst cases were in these vertical cities, these old people living in these, 4 to 8 story buildings in Milan or these 20-story buildings in Wuhan. Wuhan's actually a big city. New York, all these condominiums where you can't even, get any fresh air. So I said, listen, get fresh air, get outside. There's a study from Singapore showing you can't even transmit it outside. It's impossible because the wind blows a virus all over. You can't even transmit it. So outside, I tell people front porch or back porch. You tell me which one you want to be at, but you're outside. Second thing, nasal sprays and gargles, very important. The virus is in the nose for about 7 days, just percolating. It needs a stable, actually dry nose for it to percolate. Then when it overwhelms the system, that's when you get a runny nose and congestion, fever, headache, and then the virus goes into the lungs. So the virus is up in the nose. And very early on, there was a very important paper by Chowdhury and colleagues, randomized, prospective, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. I mean, you couldn't do any better. Hundreds of patients. And just using a very dilute iodine solution. And nowadays we put iodine in salt and water and spray it up the nose, 2 to 4 squirts, sniff it back, blow it out, gargle with it or use another gargle. All the gargles work. And twice a day clearly prevents COVID, clearly. But when you're sick with COVID, it markedly reduces the intensity and severity of symptoms. There was a paper by Baumforth and colleagues showing it prevented COVID. It had in that clinical trial, again, randomized trial, 70% reduction in getting COVID. The Chowdhury trial was an acute treatment trial. There was even a trial of using it in sick hospitalized patients because the virus is still brewing. If you can cut down the amount of virus, you're going to have less go in your lungs. Should make sense, right? The hospitals never offered nasal sprays or gargles. They just let people get sicker and sicker in the hospital. My brother was hospitalized with COVID. They didn't offer him anything. They just let him get really, really sick. And so McCullough protocol started with fresh air, nasal sprays, and gargles. There was value to some over-the-counter products. Every study, supported zinc as an antiviral, vitamin C. Vitamin D had great data, incredible data. There was 7 randomized trials showing it prevented severe COVID. There was a study showing the vitamin D level was correlated with the outcomes of COVID. So we pushed vitamin D, an over-the-counter product called quercetin that had positive data. Then there was a huge University of Virginia study using an over-the-counter antihistamine antacid called famotidine. Famotidine. It comes as Pepsid AC, comes in 20 milligrams over the counter. You can get it at any pharmacy. But the study used 80 milligrams. And it didn't stop the virus, really. It's just stopping the virus from overwhelming the immune system. See, the problem with COVID wasn't the virus so much. It was activating the immune system, then later on activating the clotting system called cytokine storm. So, a lot could be done just with over-the-counter products. Now, everything I mentioned is still, I haven't hit any of the controversial buzzwords, right? Shouldn't be controversial. Do you know that the Federal Trade Commission immediately attacked one of the big manufacturers of vitamin D? Sued him, Eric Naputi. Do you know they immediately attacked one of the leading nasal spray manufacturers? Sued him. Said they're violating FTC policy. This is absolutely...
It's disgraceful.
It's stunning. Mayo Clinic put all kinds of doubt on their website about vitamin D. Well, we're not really sure, this and that, don't trust it. Why would they cast doubt? Then we get into hydroxychloroquine. It was the first antiviral. It's modestly effective, over 300 studies. Trump was kind of on the right track. Fauci initially was on the right track. They asked Fauci in a March press release, would you use hydroxychloroquine? Fauci goes, yeah, if a patient was right in front of me, I'd use it if the patient was in a protocol. That was fine. We used hydroxychloroquine in a protocol. I got COVID early. I was in an FDA-approved protocol. I took hydroxychloroquine, very safe drug. That was fine. But then when we had data emerge on ivermectin, ivermectin, remember hydroxychloroquine is an antiparasitic, an anti-inflammatory drug for rheumatoid arthritis. Ivermectin is antiparasitic, and wow, does it have antiviral effects?
I'm really glad you brought up ivermectin. I had a person on the show recently who's running for judge for Collin County, which would basically, if we have another pandemic, he's gonna be in charge of lockdowns. And he referred to ivermectin as horse dewormer.
Oh no!
Yes. So the guy who wants to be in charge of Collin County's lockdowns and how we're going to respond to this still thinks that ivermectin is horse dewormer. What is ivermectin, and why was the government so intent on painting it so negative and not letting people know that this was a valid way to fight the disease?
Well, as I mentioned, the government tried to take out vitamin D. They tried to take out nasal sprays and gargles. They initially gave an emergency use authorization for hydroxychloroquine, which it didn't need because it was already on the market. The EUA is only for products not yet on the market. And then the FDA came out and said, don't use hydroxychloroquine. And hydroxychloroquine was slow to work and it was partially effective. But boy, ivermectin, wow. And I used a ton of it. There are dozens of randomized trials. It clearly shortened the duration of illness, reduced symptoms. Ivermectin is a human, antimicrobial agent used for parasitic infections. I've used it for scabies and other places around the world. They use it for river blindness. It's derived from the soil in Japan. It's actually from a bacteria produces it, so it's very safe and very inexpensive. And what happened with ivermectin is that our experience was so positive. With the first year, we used largely hydroxychloroquine, but once we really saw the effects of ivermectin, people promptly getting better. McCullough protocol actually shifted to ivermectin in December of 2020. We published a second paper in Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine. I had 56 authors, by the way. I had all the people who had working with ivermectin on it, and a lot of excitement. And in fact, in one large state in India, Uttar Pradesh, they just featured this, and they literally just stomped it out. Mexico opened it up. Central America, one of my colleagues up in Detroit, John McKinnon, said, listen, I'm down in Honduras. This stuff is working great. Publishing. So what happened there is the government agencies, and this is how nefarious this is, instead of letting people use ivermectin to help patients get better. And I'm telling you, as a doctor, I testified under oath, this is useful, very useful product, and very safe, safer than Tylenol. The FDA launches a campaign saying it's just a horse dewormer. And this gets out on late night TV. Jimmy Kimmel says, die wheezy if there's ivermectin.
Yes. Yeah.
And Pierre Corey, one of my colleagues, publishes a book a year or two later. It's probably the best title of any book. It's called The War on Ivermectin. So essentially, our government launches a war on ivermectin, and all governments in the world do so. They try to restrict its use. So if I wrote a prescription for ivermectin, the pharmacy would say, we're not filling it. And so they intentionally blocked hydroxychloroquine and then ivermectin. Now, later on, they blocked other drugs in the McCullough protocol, like colchicine, montelukast, corticosteroids. So anything that was illegally prescribed, generic, clinically indicated, medically necessary, off-label use, which I'm entitled to do as a doctor, the pharmacies were blocking it. So sick people would see a doctor like me, get a prescription, go to a pharmacy, and then be denied care. This went so far that Dr. Mary Telly Bowden in Houston, Dr. Paul Merrick, and Dr. Apter in Arizona, they filed a lawsuit against the FDA. Can you imagine this? Doctors in practice suing the FDA. And they sued the FDA for their deception with the public, saying this is only a horse dewormer, implying that it didn't work. And this gets in court. When they start to present the case and present the data, the lawyers for the FDA say, okay, we give up. We're taking down all of our incorrect and false information. So that is a prima facie evidence. Our government was putting out false information, trying to suppress a valuable treatment.
Why? Why would they do that?
The only reason I can think is our government wanted only one solution, and that was mass vaccination. Because listen, beyond ivermectin, we had another drug, Paxlovid and molnupiravir, that came out. And they came out late. We were already 2 years into the pandemic. Government never featured them. There were never any billboards for this, nothing. We had corticosteroids, very important. No mention of those. Colchicine, there were dozens and dozens of randomized trials. The largest randomized trials was the colchicine COVID trial that was organized out of Montreal Heart Institute. And that reduced hospitalization. That was critical. I was in that trial as a patient. I had COVID in 2020. That was suppressed. Importantly, we got to secondary antibiotics. There was never any mention that people were getting antibiotics. There was an autopsy study showing when people died, many of them had untreated secondary bacterial infections, just like influenza. So McCullough protocol, we always had azithromycin or doxycycline. It was always reasonable to do that. And then we get to the antithrombotics. This is interesting, where really sick patients and people who are already bedridden or bedbound, predictably, we found blood clots. We've never seen an infectious disease cause blood clots like this. And the Italians did a autopsy study, and people who died, they found the lungs were filled with blood clots. And the blood clots have the viral spike protein at the spine on the surface of the virus. We said, holy smokes, this protein is procoagulant. And so In McCullough protocol, we were quick to start using aspirin, and then we immediately moved into the oral anticoagulants or even heparin. So in my book, my dad is here in Dallas, and he has dementia. He has a pelvic fracture. He's flat on his back, and he's in a rehab facility here in Dallas, one of the best. He gets COVID. So he's one of the first sick elderly people in Dallas with COVID. And the title of the chapter is To the Best of My Ability. And so what I was faced with is, do I follow Anthony Fauci and allow this virus to kill my dad? Or do I step into action and be a real doctor? And that's what I did. So my dad received an early version of the McCullough protocol. We didn't know about steroids at the time. If I would have done that, I think he would have gotten better, a lot better. But he went through fresh air. He went through all the things we talked about. I put him on blood thinners. I put him on subcutaneous enoxaparin for a month, hydroxychloroquine for a month. Do you know Trump received a version of the McCullough protocol? He got all these things, and he even got monoclonal antibodies, which were the government product that was safe and effective. And I used monoclonal antibodies extensively.
He got over it in like 5 days.
He got over it in 5 days.
He's feeling great. Yeah. The rest of us.
You know what I would have done if I was Trump?
Yeah.
The only way our leaders can get better is if they get input or even constructive criticism for people to say what they would have done. This is very important.
Yeah.
If you can't think how Trump could be better or RFK can be better or Marco Rubio, then you can't criticize. So I would tell you what I would do.
Please.
If I was Trump and I just got through COVID in April of 2020, first thing I'd say is, listen, I'm 75, I'm overweight, and I just got through COVID. I got some drugs to assist me. But I'm going to make a pledge to the country that every person who gets COVID in my risk category is going to get the same quality of care.
Yeah.
Right? Can you imagine that? And I'd go one further, because I was doing this in Dallas at the time. I got through COVID early. Once you had natural immunity for the first couple of years of the pandemic, it held up great. You wouldn't get it again. And so I'd be called to people's houses. I went in people's houses sick with COVID. I didn't wear a mask, right? Other family members weren't wearing masks. Yeah. So why would somebody sick with COVID in a house around people not wearing masks, why would they suddenly go in the hospital and people had to wear hazmat suits? I mean, it just didn't make any sense. So this is what I would have done if I was Trump, is I never would have locked down the country, would never have any mask mandates. And then I would go to a hospital in New York and I'd say, take me to the sickest person in the hospital. I'd walk into the ICU, no mask. I'd sit down, I'd hold the hand of the patient and I'd say, listen, I'm the president of the United States and I will personally guarantee we'll do everything we can to get you through the illness. Yeah. And I'd walk out and I said, listen, you guys can stop wearing these hazmat suits. Let's just start taking care of patients. And let's call Dr. McCullough and call the other people in the circles to Washington and let them take over with an early treatment protocol to avoid all these hospitalizations. That would have been big time leadership. Yeah. And it could only have occurred from a doctor with medical authority. Yeah. And we've been through 3 administrations now. In Washington today, there is not a single doctor with medical authority. It's very different. Now, these other people were contributors on Fox News, like I am, or ABC News. That's fine. To be a media personality is fine, but they don't have medical authority. Medical authority means they know what to do in the time of crisis, that they are doctors, they have experience in taking actions, they take on the fiduciary responsibility. I mean, I take a patient's life in my hands. McCullough's never said that. But Bhattacharya's never said that. RFK's not a doctor, right? So doctors who have medical authority is what we need. We still need them now. We don't have them.